Well, first of all, I just want to thank all of you all for participating. One of the ideas that I've had, and I've even talked to Diante about over the past year, is exactly what can we do to engage not just within our own community, but can we be bold enough to engage members of Congress? So,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I did, I reached out to several senators' offices, but Senator Ernst, I must say that your office is not only the first one to respond, but this is our first Zoom call. So, we're, so we're
Good.
really
Okay.
excited.
I'll make sure I let them know. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Please. Like I'm thinking probably within 10 minutes, your office responded. So
Outstanding.
clearly very excited about that. But I wanted to go ahead and just take the time to introduce myself in the panel. Obviously, my name is Melik Abdul, and I've been working with Diante and others, just trying to figure out what we can do to not just engage in our own community to expand the Black conservative footprint, but how is it that we engage with members of Congress, as I mentioned. So Diante Johnson is also on the call. Diante is our, sometimes I call him our sage, our old hand, even though Diante is pretty young himself. But Diante is president of the Black Conservative Federation, and what he's been doing with this organization is something that is truly amazing. He has not just been engaging on the ground in the grassroots efforts. When we're talking about things like making sure that you're knocking doors, working with candidates to get them elected, but also engaging across the aisle with our Democrats friends to really try to figure out some solutions to the problems that are germane to our community. I have Angela Stanton King on the phone call. Her name speaks for itself, but I'll go ahead and finish the introduction. Angela has been, if you see anyone in the party or across the country working on things like prison reform, criminal justice reform, re-entry for women, formerly incarcerated individuals, Angela has been out front along with her godmother, Alveda King, on really pushing this and standing beside the administration and the party to make sure that they're touching on those issues that we're really concerned about. And so Angela has been probably the most vocal advocate. She's not just a social media influencer. Angela has really been putting in the work. So I'm really thankful that she's on the call as well. And lastly, I chose CJ for last. CJ's working on his video, but I'm so proud of what CJ is doing. CJ is also, as with Angela, CJ's down in Atlanta, and CJ will be attending college this fall. And I believe it is the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. Yes, Roll Tide.
You couldn't get into Iowa State University. I'm sorry.
But I'm so happy.
Congratulations.
I'm so happy.
I'm gonna have to try to transfer.
But I'm so happy with what CJ is doing. CJ is not just a social media influencer. CJ is probably the most visible. How old are you again, CJ?
I'm 17.
17 years old, and CJ is on the national stage already. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's doing at the University of Alabama. As someone who attended school in Tuscaloosa, Alabama myself, Stillman College, I want to tell CJ, yes, the University of Alabama is there in Tuscaloosa, but also don't forget Stillman College, directly not far from the university, probably about 10 minutes. So make sure you go there. And lastly, I'm going to open the floor for Senator Ernst. And again, I just want to say thank you for your team. They've done an outstanding job with setting this up in a very short period of time. So I want to open the floor to Senator Ernst, and thank you again for agreeing to participate.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate being on this platform today as well, and understanding that we have some very, very significant challenges that our nation is not just facing today, but what we have faced in decades past. And I think we are at a turning point where we have seen monumental decisions in the past that have helped move us forward. I think we're facing that again right now. And it's really important that we're listening. The old adage that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So in Congress, that is my goal, is to listen a little bit more, speak a little bit less, figure out a way to find that solution moving forward. But it can't be something, obviously, that I'm coming up with. A little bit about my background. Now, I grew up in a very rural Southwest Iowa Swedish community. Not much color, in that community. There he is. Thank you. Hey, CJ. So my experience growing up was very different, but I guess in our community we didn't ever encounter racism just because there were not people of color in our community. But as I got older, went to Iowa State University, and of course when I joined the military, moved to the South with my former husband, who was active duty, and the reserve units I served in, the first one in Opelika, Alabama. And I was quite the minority there, as well as the engineer unit I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And then moving on over to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, I was always a minority member. But whether it was my military family, whether it was the civilian workforce that I worked with, where I was always a minority, I always felt very welcome and loved. When my husband was away on an assignment for a year, I stayed in Columbia, South Carolina. The women I worked with would include me in their family gatherings, and the love that I felt in that community was overwhelming. And I always wanted to make sure that if faced with that same situation, if I'm part of the majority, I always want to make those minority members feel very loved and included as well. And I think as a population across the United States, we should always strive for that, that we just get over whatever inherent biases there might be. I had a woman in judiciary yesterday that said she believed everyone has inherent biases. And I don't know if that's true or not, but bottom line, we should all try to be very inclusive. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the time to be able to speak with you today. There are issues. There are issues out there, and we've just got to figure out, how to share a little more love and kindness across the nation rather than some of the hatred and just unease that we have felt. And I would say as well, too, being a white person, a Caucasian, just in all honesty, some of these conversations are very difficult for white people to have, just, to be frank. And I think that's what we have to understand as we're trying to sort through this. The reason that maybe we haven't come as far as we should have, it's really uncomfortable to admit you don't know something. Right. It's uncomfortable to say racism exists. We all want to believe that we live in a great nation, and we do live in a great nation, but even a great nation can have flaws. Yeah. And yeah, so I think we just need to start there and admit we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, and you know what? I think you made a very good point in talking about these being uncomfortable conversations, but I wanted to add something to that. It's not just uncomfortable for our white allies. These are uncomfortable conversations that Black people, that we have to have. So we're in a situation where we have to be uncomfortable. We put ourselves in these positions to engage. And so we have to, and that uncomfortableness sometimes is listening. So we can't just talk, we also have to listen. And so that's why I appreciate, you deciding to get on the call. And one of the things I actually wanted to ask you is, and this was really one of the things that prompted me to reach out to your office, is that I noticed that I believe it was you, Senator Ernst, but also Senator Langford, Senator Grassley, and Scott. I believe you reintroduced the
Walter Scott Act.
Yeah, please, I would like for you to talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Of course, working with Senator Grassley on judiciary, and he's my senior senator, and I just love him dearly. He is a very thoughtful man. Mm-hmm. He is very justice driven. and to be able to partner with Senator Tim Scott, who really is one of my favorites in the Senate. He is just a wonderful man. I mean, we'll just put it like that.
Yeah,
He is just
absolutely.
very thoughtful in all of his actions, and being able to work with him on this bill, reintroducing the Walter Scott Act, because we really don't know data from across the United States. We really have no idea how many people have suffered injustice, been killed at the hands of law enforcement officials. And if we don't know that, how can we correct it when we don't know what's going on?
Right.
So to be able to compile that at a national level, and to know that if they're not participating in the program, they're not going to receive federal dollars,
Right.
you know, it's a little bit of an incentive to,
Yeah.
you know, get on board, get with the program. But data sharing and transparency is really an important key to moving forward with anything. Then we can't deny anymore that, no, this doesn't happen in my community, it doesn't happen in my state. We have the facts. And then that will lead to greater efforts, I hope, on the part of Congress or even local or state authorities, and making sure that the decisions are well-founded and that they are the right actions.
I think that's great, and I'm glad you mentioned the funding, that funding issue, because we hear a lot, and I can imagine that a lot of people are going to criticize the effort, not realizing that this is tied to funding. So that is one of the checks and balances that Congress can place on these type of initiatives, to make sure that if we're doing things, even when what the president talked about yesterday in his executive order, one of the things that many of those things, as far as the credentialing, were tied to was funding. These things can be tied to legislation. So there's a lot of things that Congress can do that we really don't talk enough about. What I wanted to do was kick off just a quick question and answer section. And I would like to start with Diante. Diante, did you have a question for the senator?
Thank you again, Senator Ernst, for taking the time. I've spent time in Iowa. I served on Congressman David Young's campaign as his youth director. The first day I came to the campaign was Labor Day, and I was down in Diagonal for the Labor Day.
I know Diagonal.
And that was the first time I saw pork chops on a stick, and I was immediately at home. And so I really enjoyed that. But, you know, I thank you because out of all 50 states, and we're just being honest, I mean, you know, we expect more senators to have come forth first, and so we thank you for taking interest in this, because there's no secret that Iowa is not as well diverse as, you know, someone like Georgia, and so I do thank you for that. But it's so important, and you know, I want to ask you a question: is there any talk about body cameras? Is there any talk about enforcing body cameras federally, but also what the consequence would be because, you know, we talk about body cameras and then sometimes they say, well, what if they turn them off? What the consequence will be for officers who turn off those body cameras?
You bet. And there is discussion, and this is a conversation that Senator Langford and Senator Scott and I and a number of others are having, as hopefully being included as part of a justice reform package that will move forward, is making sure that, one, we see more body cameras across the United States for our law enforcement officials. I think that's good not only for that officer, to protect that officer, but certainly in cases like we've seen recently in the death of George Floyd or others, that it gives us a true and accurate picture of what has occurred. So it's safeguarding that law enforcement officer, it's safeguarding the public, when that law enforcement officer also knows that someone else will be able to watch and review what happened. So they do think a little more about, what are my actions? Am I doing the right thing? So yes, there is a conversation, and then making sure that, again, federal dollars, if we buy those cameras, we want to make sure they're being used. And then again, using maybe that carrot or stick, incentive or punishment, that if they are not, adequately using those cameras, then we pull back on federal funding. So many discussions about that right now. And I am a big believer in more transparency. I think it's really important that we do that. And cameras are a huge part of that.
Absolutely. I think it protects us all around.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, Diante. I now try to actually pivot over to Angela. Angela, did you have a question for the senator?
I do have a question. Before I give my question, though, I'd like to thank the senator for giving us her time. I always like to follow you guys and pay attention. I don't know if you know, but I'm running for the 5th congressional seat here in Georgia against John Lewis as a Republican. So I'm up to my neck here, but I'm definitely learning a lot. And Senator Hurst, I really appreciate you, taking the lead on this effort to bring justice reform. One of the things that I would like to see, Senator, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's something I mentioned in our listening session at the White House last week. I would love to see more community policing. I'd like to see residency requirements where we are having the police the communities that they live in. Just being from an area, the same exact area where Rayshard Brooks was shot and killed, unfortunately, last week. And I went to the community, of course, to try to bring peace. And I think what I'm hearing from them are saying, okay, well, there's this atmosphere that we've created. It's kind of like the war on police. So when the police come into a situation, they're already on edge because they're not sure if their life is in danger. And then you have the community that feels as though they're on edge too because they don't know if their life is in danger. So if we begin to build rapport between the relationships with the police and the community, then maybe these one-on-one confrontations won't blow up every time because you'll have people that actually know each other. That's something that I'd like to see. And another question that I have for you, in the wakes of the Rayshard Brooks shooting, where we know that we need to work in our communities in regards to making sure that they comply to the officers' orders. We'd also like to see more respect for authority. But the community is saying, we know he was intoxicated. We know he fought back and he turned around to run. And when he was running, he was shot and killed in his back. Is that something that you guys are willing to discuss in this Justice Reform Act? Are there other ways of dealing with intense situations, or is death the only answer? Should we be looking at when, I guess, it's okay or not okay for officers to be allowed to use deadly force? And if someone is running away and they know, I guess they patted him down, they knew he did not have a gun, but if someone is running away, is that really justification to kill that person if they are presumed to no longer be a threat?
Right. Yeah, thank you, Angela, very much. And for the first point you made about community policing, I do believe that is important, that the force take on the look, of course, of the community and have a good understanding of the community. I love the expression, and I've used this so many times, whether, I served in the National Guard or, it's something we call grow our own. So people from within your community, you're raising them to fill those positions of authority within your community. And we even do that in Iowa, not maybe intentionally, but we have young people that will go through high school in a community, go off to a law enforcement academy and ask to be assigned back in their home territory. And so we know those troopers, the state troopers that are working our area. We know the people on the police department. They know the different areas of their communities, and they know the individuals. And so just for example, I have a dear friend's daughter who has some mental difficulties, and she runs into different periods of time when maybe she's struggling with medication or whatever, and she has had run-ins with law enforcement. And instead of taking her into jail, they know to call There are certain members of the family or others that they can engage with to divert her from going into, she struggles with mental health. And so they know that though, and they know the members of the family, so they know who to go to in times of need. And I think that that's an important part of having someone who knows your community, knows the families, cares about those individuals, and can help them through those difficult situations, rather than just sending them to the jail, the local jail. I think there are so many benefits to community policing. As far as use of deadly force, there are certain things that we can discuss at the federal level, and we certainly are heavily engaged in that right now. But certainly that is something that our state and local authorities should be acting on immediately. There are non-lethal types of actions that can be taken. So whether it's, rubber bullets, whether it is the taser, that they had, but certainly someone that is running away, that makes no sense to me. There are things that can be done immediately by the local authorities.
Thank you so much, Senator Hurst, and thank you for listening, and thank you for understanding. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Angela, for stepping up. I love it.
Whoa, look, I need some support. Don't forget about me.
Thanks, Angela, so much. We won't forget.
Yeah, and lastly, we're going to bring CJ on. I know that CJ, as I said, I think, CJ is actually going to the University of Alabama, but the senator has a hard stop. And so I wanted to go ahead and bring CJ in to see that, CJ, did you have a question for the senator?
Definitely, I appreciate it. And Senator Ernst, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. I've seen a lot of commentary from those on the left who have called in wake of these events for the defunding of the police and things like that. But I think if anything, looking forward, what we really need to do is fund the police more. I think if your argument is that the police need more robust training here in this country, then you have to provide the funding for that to happen. And I've seen some solutions on the table that include making it a state licensed occupation, so they would be required to undergo continued education training, but also too just improving that training altogether. And I think one of my questions would be, is that something that the Senate is exploring, tying more federal dollars to improving the robust and comprehensive nature of training to be a police officer in America? But also, too, I understand there's been some debate about qualified immunity. As a ideological conservative, I truly do believe in the rule of law, and also the idea that no one is above the law. I don't believe every police officer is bad, but I also believe that if there was some type of mechanism that would provide for ensuring that people, in the event that in the commission of their duties, that they are unjustly treated, if they were able to seek some type of legal recourse, I do think that it would improve the interactions between community and the police, and it also would highly discourage those bad apples within police departments to act, just better in general, more positively. And so I think that would also be my second question: is what is your view on ending qualified immunity? And do you think that would be a reasonable solution to discuss in the days and weeks to come with this ongoing discussion?
CJ, thank you again. I want to thank you for participating, and I think you have an extraordinary future. I'm excited to watch. If you want to go to graduate school in Iowa, we'll get you hooked up. Okay, but anyway, first, defunding the police has been a big push, and it's not a reality. It's a radical left talking point. I do think that we do need to invest in our law enforcement and making sure that we are training them properly, whether it's de-escalation and maybe providing more for those that might be crisis intervention specialists, things like that. I don't believe in defunding the police. I think they're a necessity. Can we do better? Absolutely. So let's do better.
Yes.
When it comes to indemnity, I do think that there is a mechanism. We've got to meet in the middle somewhere, because I do think if there is an unjustified killing of another individual, then there should be some sort of liability out there. I'm not sure that we put it directly on that individual officer or at maybe the city level. But I do think that there should be some sort of opportunity to say, this is not justified. You have taken a life. We need to pay for that loss of life. So we need to find a path forward there. And what was talked about yesterday in judiciary is maybe at that city level. The city then is responsible. They know they're on the hook should something happen. So they're going to make sure that they are properly training and screening those individuals and getting rid of bad actors if they see that there's some sort of issue out there. So we're going to continue to debate that. I don't know that that's the right answer, but I think we are on a pathway to figuring out who should be responsible should that happen. So whether it's the individual, whether it is that community, we certainly need to figure out that answer. But yes, we're having some pretty significant discussions on that.
Yes, that is awesome. I think that's a great answer. Senator, I wanted to, again, just on behalf of all of us, thank you from all of us, even the Black community, to really thank you for taking the time to really engage with us here. I can say this is probably the first such call that a member of Congress, especially on the Senate side, GOP, has made with Black conservatives. So this is awesome. I'll be on a call with Ashley a little later to talk about the internship program. So
wonderful. Oh, good.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to pull CJ in on that eventually too. But
and what if I can, parting words, if I can too, and where I would love to have your assistance is not just on issues like this, but certainly I, as a former member of the Armed Services, I went through ROTC at Iowa State University, but we have tremendous military academies, our service academies. And what we find is that not all members of Congress, and we've maybe seen some of those Black communities or Asian communities, they aren't putting forward nominations to these service academies.
Absolutely.
It's such a phenomenal education for those that want to go on and serve and be leaders in our military. And I would just encourage, as you have outreach, if you would encourage other offices to make sure that they are nominating young men and women of color for these service academies. Because if we want change, we need diversity in our leadership as well. And it's a great place for those young men and women to start. So thank you all so very much for engaging me, and I look forward to working with all of you on conservative solutions and moving forward. And CJ, best of luck to you as well. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Back to you.
All righty. Thank you, Senator Ernst. Thanks for everybody on the call. Senator, you have real work to do on the floor, I'm sure. So
yeah, I sure do.
Thank you for joining the call, and I'll be in touch with your office soon.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, very, very much.
All righty. Thank you.